Happy Halloween, everyone! Instead of spooky tales tonight, we're diving into something equally intriguing.
Oh, I like that.
The Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, under Chair Lina Khan.
Okay.
Our source. A hefty report from the House Oversight Committee staff giving us a peek behind the curtain of how the FTC has been operating recently. And let me tell you, it's a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that we're seeing a real shift in the FTC's approach.
Yeah.
I mean, this report paints a picture of significant change, a real departure from past practices, which raises some interesting questions about where the agency is headed.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into the FTC under Chair Khan. So let's start with Chair Khan herself. From academic superstar to leading the FTC in just a few years. That's quite a journey.
Absolutely. Lina Khan really made a name for herself with her work critiquing Amazon. You know, she argued that existing antitrust laws just weren't equipped to handle the complexities of digital markets. So her nomination and quick rise to chair by the Biden administration really signaled a change in how the government views big tech.
So we have someone who's been openly critical of bigness now running the agency that's supposed to ensure fair competition. Seems like a pretty big deal, right?
It definitely raises questions, and the report highlights Executive Order 14036, which established a whole-of-government approach to competition policy. This was a clear move away from the previous focus on consumer welfare, signaling a potentially more aggressive stance towards anti-competitive behavior.
And on top of that, Chair Khan was appointed to the White House Competition Council, which was created by that same executive order. Isn't that unusual for the head of an independent agency?
It is. And this is where it starts to get really interesting, because as the report points out, this could blur the lines between the White House and an independent agency like the FTC. So it's something to keep in mind as we look at how the FTC has been acting.
Now let's talk mergers. It sounds like Chair Khan has really shaken things up here.
It's been a pretty significant shift. The report details a number of changes Khan has implemented that have really impacted merger reviews. For example, she reversed the long-standing policy of early termination of reviews. Wow. She also started issuing these pre-consummation warning letters and drastically increased the paperwork burden on companies. All of these moves seem designed to slow down the merger process.
The report even uses the phrase throwing sand in the gears to describe Khan's impact. And former Commissioner Phillips actually called these policies a tax on mergers, suggesting they disproportionately affect smaller companies.
Yeah, that's a crucial point, because it's not just about blocking mergers that are seen as anti-competitive. It's about creating a chilling effect on all mergers. The report argues that this approach could stifle innovation and end up harming consumers in the long run.
So potentially big unintended consequences. But hasn't Chair Khan had some wins too?
There have been settlements and consent decrees, but the report focuses on some high-profile losses, most notably the Meta Within and Microsoft Activision cases. In both situations, the court ruled against the FTC, finding they hadn't presented sufficient evidence of harm to competition.
Sounds like those were some pretty big setbacks.
They were, and they've led some people to question how effective Chair Khan is and whether FTC threats carry the same weight anymore.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting. The report highlights what it calls a transatlantic drift, suggesting the FTC is looking more and more to Europe for inspiration when it comes to regulation.
Exactly. The report specifically points to the EU's Digital Markets Act, or DMA, which imposes strict requirements and hefty fines on large tech companies, most of which, as it happens, are American.
Oh, wow.
And get this, the FTC actually sent staff over to Europe to help implement the DMA.
Hold on. So the FTC is helping a foreign government implement regulations that could hurt American companies. Why?
Well, the report highlights testimony from FTC Director Coppola, who said they wanted to really understand the DMA just in case they get similar authority in the U.S. And we've seen growing support among congressional Democrats for legislation similar to the DMA.
So are we headed towards a more European-style regulatory approach here in the U.S.? That's a huge shift.
It's definitely a question worth asking. The report argues that copying Europe's approach could have unintended consequences for American businesses and our whole digital economy.
Then there's the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. This was meant to protect U.S. companies from unfair practices in foreign markets, right? But the FTC opposed some of the digital trade chapters in this agreement.
That's right. They said these chapters would conflict with domestic antitrust efforts and demanded more participation in the negotiations. This move was criticized by both Democrats and Republicans and ultimately led to those chapters being tabled.
And the report suggests the FTC may have overstepped its bounds here and that this could end up helping China in the long run.
It's a complex issue for sure.
Yeah.
But the report raises concerns about how much influence the FTC has on international trade policy and whether their actions are actually in the best interest of American businesses and consumers.
Okay, so we've got the FTC potentially mirroring Europe's regulatory approach and seemingly undermining trade deals designed to help American companies. It's a lot to take in.
It is, and the report goes even deeper. Let's take a closer look at two specific cases. Illumina Grail and Amazon iRobot. Both involved mergers between American companies that the FTC ended up working to block with the help of their European counterparts.
Wait, hold on. So the FTC is enlisting foreign allies to block mergers between American companies. This is getting even more interesting.
These cases raise some serious questions about exactly what the FTC's role is and whether they're exceeding their authority. In the Illumina Grail case, the FTC actually reached out to multiple European agencies before the European Commission even said they had jurisdiction. They also fought to keep their communications about these cases secret, which raises concerns about transparency.
And with the Amazon iRobot case, the companies eventually abandoned the merger after facing opposition from both U.S. and EU regulators.
Right, and the report points out that the FTC was in close contact with the European Commission throughout that whole investigation. Commissioner Slaughter even admitted that the FTC was prepared to block the deal themselves.
So, it feels a bit like Chair Khan is trying to play chess on a global scale, using these alliances to box in American companies.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an accurate read of the situation?
It's certainly a perspective highlighted in the report, and it raises the question of whether the FTC might be prioritizing international collaboration over the potential impact on American businesses. Remember, the report we're examining is coming from the House Oversight Committee's staff, so it's important to bear in mind their perspective.
Good point. It's like getting one side of a very complex story. What about this strike force on unfair and illegal pricing that was launched by the Biden administration? It sounds a little Orwellian, don't you think?
Yeah, the name certainly grabs attention, doesn't it? This initiative tasked the FTC with investigating companies that were allegedly contributing to inflation through unfair pricing practices. Now, the report suggests this might have been more about optics than substance.
So basically a way to deflect blame from the administration's own policies.
Well, the report presents evidence from the San Francisco Fed that suggests markups haven't been the primary driver of inflation. Instead, they point to government spending as a more likely culprit. It's certainly a contentious issue.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Chair Khan's background, her impact on mergers, those high-profile court losses, the FTC's relationship with European regulators, and even their role in international trade deals. It's clear that the FTC under Chair Khan is a very different beast than what we've seen in the past.
It's a dramatic shift, and it's unfolding right before our eyes. The implications for you as someone who follows this closely are significant. These changes could reshape the entire tech landscape and have a ripple effect throughout the economy.
So what's the bottom line here? What should you be paying attention to as this story continues to develop?
I think the biggest question is whether this new approach will ultimately benefit or harm consumers and the American economy. The report raises concerns about unintended consequences like stifled innovation, higher prices, and even job losses. But it's also possible that these changes could lead to a fairer and more competitive marketplace.
It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure story, except the ending hasn't been written yet.
Exactly. And you have a front-row seat to witness how it all unfolds.
Okay, so big changes, big questions. But focusing on the FTC itself for a moment, are there any checks and balances in place to prevent them from becoming too powerful?
That's an important point. The report emphasizes the roles of congressional oversight and judicial review as safeguards against agency overreach.
So Congress and the courts have a part to play in keeping the FTC in check. But what about within the FTC itself? Are there any internal mechanisms for dissent or accountability?
That's where things get a bit more complicated. The report details several changes Chair Khan has made that have centralized power and potentially limited internal dissent. For example, she now has the authority to select presiding officers at rulemaking hearings, which used to be done by an independent judge.
It almost sounds like she's stacking the deck in her favor.
It's a concern the report raises, for sure. And it's not limited to rulemaking hearings. The report also points out the FTC's increased reliance on administrative litigation, which they almost always win. This arguably gives them an unfair advantage and limits the ability of companies to challenge their decisions.
So it's not just about what the FTC is doing, but how they're doing it. There seem to be some concerns about due process and transparency.
Absolutely. The report really stresses how important these principles are for a fair and impartial regulatory process.
Okay, so we've got potential overreach concerns about due process and transparency, and a shift towards a more European-style regulatory approach. That's a lot to digest. Is there anything else we should know before we wrap up?
One more thing the report highlights is the impact Chair Khan's leadership has had on the FTC's staff. There's been a noticeable exodus of experienced personnel, and those who've stayed report a decline in morale.
So not only is the FTC changing how it approaches regulation, it's also experiencing some internal turmoil. That can't be good for their effectiveness.
It's definitely a valid concern. The report suggests this loss of experienced staff could hinder the FTC's ability to do its job properly, and they imply that the changes implemented by Chair Khan may have contributed to this exodus.
So the picture the report paints is fairly bleak. A lot of changes and a lot of concerns raised about the direction those changes are taking us in.
It's true that the report doesn't shy away from criticizing Chair Khan's leadership, but it's important to remember that this is just one perspective. There are certainly people who support her vision and believe these changes are necessary.
Right, so there are different viewpoints out there, and it's still early in Chair Khan's tenure. Things could change.
Absolutely. The story of the FTC under Chair Khan is far from over, and it's definitely a story worth following because it has implications for all of us. It's about the balance of power between government and business, about innovation and consumer welfare, and about the kind of future we're building.
That's a really powerful way to put it. So any final thoughts? What should our listeners be paying attention to as this story unfolds?
I think there are a few key things to watch. First, keep an eye on how the courts respond to the FTC's challenges to mergers. Those losses in the Meta Within and Microsoft Activision cases were significant setbacks. But there are other cases in the pipeline. Second, watch for any legislation that mirrors the EU's Digital Markets Act. That would signal a major shift in how we regulate big tech in the US. And finally, it's worth paying attention to how things play out inside the FTC. Will they be able to attract and retain top talent? Will there be space for internal debate and dissent? These are all questions that will shape the FTC's future and have a direct impact on our lives.
That's great advice. Thanks for breaking all of this down for us. It's definitely given me a lot to think about. It's a good reminder that even though it's Halloween, the real drama at the FTC is just getting started.
Indeed. It's a story with more twists and turns than a horror movie.
All right, everyone. We've covered a lot of ground today in our deep dive into the FTC under Chair Khan. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And maybe just a little bit spooky, given the date.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
Yeah.
But before we go, this deep dive wouldn't be complete without leaving you with something to ponder, something that wasn't in the report but that we think is worth considering. It goes back to the idea of the FTC being used as a political tool.
What's intriguing is that the report really focuses on the negative potential consequences of the FTC's actions under Chair Khan. But what if there are positive outcomes, too? What if these changes actually do lead to a fairer, more competitive marketplace? What if they help to curb the power of big tech companies, which some argue have become too dominant? These are questions worth exploring. It's important to look at all sides of this complex issue and form our own opinions.
That's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the potential downsides, but there's always the possibility of positive change, too.
Exactly. Even if we don't agree with all of Chair Khan's decisions, we should be open to the possibility that they could lead to a better outcome for consumers and businesses.
That's a refreshing perspective. So as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring these questions and forming your own opinions. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.